United Nations, New York, September 29, 2025. In a defiant address before the United Nations General Assembly, North Korea's Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, Kim Gyong, declared that Pyongyang would never relinquish its nuclear weapons, calling them a cornerstone of the nation's sovereignty and survival. Despite the hardline stance, Kim signalled that North Korea remained open to dialogue, while strongly condemning what he described as foreign interference and hypocrisy in global politics. Delegates from around the world gathered in the UN headquarters in New York watched as the North Korean envoy walked calmly to the podium. The atmosphere was tense, with several diplomats visibly taking notes as Kim began his highly anticipated address. His remarks combined a firm rejection of international calls for denuclearization with pointed criticism of historical injustices and ongoing conflicts in other parts of the world. Kim wasted no time in underscoring North Korea's unwavering commitment to its nuclear weapons program. Quoting directly, he stated, Kim Gyong said, "In order to permanently maintain this state of balance and ensure a lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula, we have stipulated nuclear in our constitution as a sacred and absolute thing that can never be touched upon and tampered with." This remark drew a mixture of silence and visible unease across the Assembly Hall. The choice of words, sacred and absolute, emphasized Pyongyang's framing of its nuclear arsenal not merely as a military asset, but as an integral part of its national identity and constitutional law. Kim further argued that the push for North Korea to disarm was an attack on its sovereignty. Kim Gyong said, "The imposition of a denuclearization on the DPRK is tantamount to demanding it to surrender sovereignty and the right to existence and violate the Constitution. We will never give up sovereignty." By linking the nuclear program to the very survival of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Kim attempted to counter international criticism that often portrays Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions as a global security threat. Instead, he cast them as a defensive measure born of historical experiences and ongoing geopolitical pressures. The North Korean envoy also used his speech to criticize the role of powerful nations within the UN system. He accused them of distorting the mission of the global body for their own political ends. Kim Gyong said, "In the annals of the UN history, disgraceful pages are also recorded where the title of the UN, overwhelmed by high-handedness and arbitrariness of the hegemonic forces, was abused in exerting pressure to deprive the sovereign states of their legitimate right to normal development, quite contrary to the spirit of the Charter. This sharp rebuke reflected a long-held grievance of Pyongyang that international institutions often act under the influence of dominant powers, particularly the United States, to undermine the sovereignty of smaller nations." Reiterating the central theme of his address, Kim reinforced Pyongyang's stance that its nuclear weapons are inseparable from the country's survival and identity. He declared, Kim Gyong said, "We will never give up nuclear, which is our state law, national policy and sovereign power, as well as the right to existence. Under any circumstances, we will never walk away from this position." This uncompromising position appeared to close the door on hopes for renewed denuclearization talks, at least under current conditions. However, by framing the issue as one of sovereignty rather than aggression, North Korea seemed to be signaling that future negotiations could only occur on terms it considers equitable. In a surprising pivot, Kim addressed conflicts outside the Korean Peninsula, particularly the ongoing violence in the Middle East. Drawing a stark historical parallel, he remarked, Kim Gyong said, 80 years have passed since the end of World War II, yet genocide and crimes against humanity that can even overshadow Hitler are now openly committed in the Middle East, much to the consternation of the world. The statement resonated sharply, highlighting Pyongyang's attempt to position itself as a moral critic of international double standards. While North Korea itself has faced extensive criticism for human rights violations, Kim's words sought to portray his country as a voice against atrocities committed elsewhere. Kim then shifted focus specifically to the Israel-Palestine conflict, directly calling out Israel for its military actions in Gaza. Kim Gyong said, "We strongly urge Israel to stop immediately crimes against humanity and withdraw from the Gaza Strip. Likewise, we fully support the establishment of an independent state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital and the Palestine's full-fledged membership of the UN." The remarks drew both applause and evident discomfort from different delegations. By endorsing Palestinian statehood and condemning Israel's military actions, North Korea aligned itself with a long-standing bloc of nations that view the Palestinian struggle as a core issue of international justice. While the bulk of Kim's address underscored North Korea's uncompromising stance on nuclear weapons, the envoy also left a faint opening for diplomacy. Analysts noted that the very act of engaging at the UN and framing his country's position in the language of sovereignty and law suggested Pyongyang was still willing to be part of international dialogue, albeit on its own terms. The timing of the speech also carried significance. Delivered against the backdrop of renewed tensions on the Korean Peninsula and heightened conflict in the Middle East, Kim's words seemed aimed not only at defending his country's policies, but also at reshaping its international image. By portraying North Korea as both a staunch defender of its sovereignty and a critic of global injustices, Pyongyang sought to shift some of the moral scrutiny away from itself. Delegates in the hall maintained a largely restrained demeanor during the speech, though there were visible shifts in posture and whispered exchanges during Kim's most forceful statements. At the conclusion of his remarks, the North Korean delegation applauded, standing in solidarity with their representative, while most other delegations refrained from overt responses. Observers noted that the reactions, or lack thereof, underscored the deep divisions within the UN over how to address North Korea's nuclear program and the broader question of sovereignty versus collective security. Kim's speech comes amid ongoing stalemates in denuclearization negotiations. Previous talks between Pyongyang and Washington, as well as multilateral efforts involving other regional powers, have failed to produce lasting agreements. North Korea has consistently argued that its nuclear program is a deterrent against what it perceives as hostile policies and military threats from the United States and its allies. In recent months, reports of continued missile tests and military parades showcasing new weaponry have renewed global concerns over Pyongyang's intentions. At the same time, the country faces heavy international sanctions and a struggling domestic economy, pressures that some analysts believe could eventually push it back to the negotiating table. Despite the geopolitical rhetoric, Kim's insistence on nuclear weapons as tied to the right to existence reflects a deeply ingrained narrative in North Korean politics. The leadership frequently invokes the history of foreign invasions and the devastation of the Korean War as justification for its security policies. To many ordinary North Koreans, the nuclear program is portrayed as a shield against a repeat of past traumas. International critics, however, argue that the government's focus on military buildup diverts resources away from urgently needed economic development and humanitarian relief for its population. The address has once again put the spotlight on the challenges facing global nuclear disarmament efforts. Kim's assertion that North Korea's nuclear weapons are sacred and absolute complicates any pathway toward arms reduction in the region. Moreover, Pyongyang's open condemnation of Israel and explicit support for Palestinian statehood may influence diplomatic alignments, particularly among nations in the global south that share similar positions on the Middle East conflict. Kim Son-gyong's UN speech underscored the persistence of one of the world's most intractable security dilemmas, the tension between national sovereignty and global non-proliferation norms. By framing the nuclear issue as a constitutional and existential matter, North Korea has set the bar high for any future negotiations. At the same time, its criticism of atrocities in the Middle East and endorsement of Palestinian statehood signaled Pyongyang's attempt to broaden its diplomatic narrative beyond the peninsula. Whether this strategy will win it new allies or further isolate it remains to be seen. As the delegates filed out of the General Assembly Hall, the fundamental questions raised by Kim's address about sovereignty, security, and international justice remained as unresolved as ever.
대전 이후 가장 혼란스럽고 폭력적인 세상을 목격하고 있습니다. 현대 역사에는 수많은 조선반도의 현 객관적인 안보 상황은 그 어느 때보다 심각한 도전에 감사합니다.
I thank the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Democratic People's Republic.
이 균형 상태를 연구하고
In order to permanently maintain this state of balance and ensure a lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula, we have stipulated nuclear in our constitution as a sacred and absolute thing that can never be touched upon and tampered with. The imposition of a denuclearization on the DPRK is a tantamount to demanding it to surrender sovereignty and the right to existence and violate the constitution. We will never give up sovereignty.
우리는 절대로 주권 포기, 생존권 포기.
In the annals of the UN history, disgraceful pages are also recorded where the title of the UN, overwhelmed by high-handedness and arbitrariness of the hegemonic forces, was abused in exerting pressure to deprive the sovereign states of their legitimate right to normal development, quite contrary to the spirit of the Charter. We will never give up nuclear, which is our state law, national policy and sovereign power, as well as the right to existence. Under any circumstances, we will never walk away from this position. 80 years have passed since the end of World War II, yet genocide and crimes against humanity that can even overshadow Hitler are now openly committed in the Middle East, much to the consternation of the world. We strongly urge Israel to stop immediately crimes against humanity and withdraw from the Gaza Strip. Likewise, we fully support the establishment of an independent state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital and the Palestine's full-fledged membership of the UN.